of Green Gables. Bound volumes from Part 1 to Part 3. Introduction. Carrot, carrot, whispers Gilbert Bryde across the school desk, and he puts out his arm and pulls Anne's long red plate. But Anne jumps up and cries, "You horrible boy, I hate you." And she hits him hard over the head with her book. Life in the sleepy village of Avonlea is never boring after Anne Shirley comes to live with the Cuthberts. They wanted to adopt an orphan boy to help with the farm work at Green Gables. But instead, they get Anne, who has red hair and freckles and who never stops talking. She's a loving child, but she's always in trouble. There's a visit from Mrs. Lynde, then the cake for the vicar's wife, and the trouble with her hair. And after the fight at school, will she ever speak to Gilbert Bryde again? Chapter 1. A surprise for the Cuthberts. Matthew Cuthbert lived with his sister, Marilla, on their farm on Prince Edward Island. Their farmhouse, Green Gables, was just outside the little village of Avonlea. Matthew was nearly 60 and had a long brown beard. His sister was 5 years younger. They were both tall and thin with dark hair. Everybody in Avonlea knew that the Cuthberts were quiet people who worked very hard on their farm. One afternoon, Matthew drove the horse and cart to the station. "Has the 5:30 train arrived yet?" he asked the station master. "Yes," the man replied. "And there's a passenger who's waiting for you, a little girl." "A little girl?" asked Matthew. "But I've come for the boy. The children's home is sending us one of their orphan boys. We're going to adopt him, you see, and he's going to help me with the farm work." "Well, perhaps the children's home didn't have any boys, so they sent you a girl," answered the station master carelessly. "Here she is." Matthew turned shyly to speak to the child. She was about 11, with long red hair into plaits. Her face was small, white and thin, with a lot of freckles, and she had large gray-green eyes. She was wearing an old brown hat and a dress which was too small for her. "Are you Mr. Cuthbert of Green Gables?" she asked excitedly in a high voice. "I'm very happy to come and live with you and belong to you. I've never belonged to anyone, you see. The people at Children's Home were very kind, but it's not very exciting to live in a place like that, is it?" Matthew felt sorry for the child. How could he tell her that it was all a mistake? But he couldn't just leave her at the station. He decided to take her home with him. Marilla could explain the mistake to her. He was surprised that he enjoyed the journey home. He was a quiet, shy man, and he didn't like talking himself. But today, he only had to listen because the little girl talked and talked and talked. She told him all about herself while they drove along. "My parents died when I was a baby, you know, and for the last 3 years, I've had to work for my food. I've lived with 3 different families and looked after their children, so I've always been poor, and I haven't got any nice dresses. But I just imagine that I'm wearing the most beautiful blue dress and a big hat with flowers on and blue shoes, and then I'm happy. Do you imagine things sometimes?" "Well, I not often," said Matthew. They were now driving past some very old apple trees next to the road. The trees were full of sweet-smelling, snowy white flowers. The little girl looked at them. "Aren't the trees beautiful?" she said happily. "But am I talking too much? Please tell me. I can stop if necessary, you know." Matthew smiled at her. "You go on talking," he answered. "I like listening to you." When they arrived at Green Gables, Marilla came to the door to meet them. But when she saw the little girl, she cried in surprise. "Matthew, who's that? Where's the boy?" The children's home has made a mistake, he said unhappily, and sent a girl, not a boy. The child was listening carefully. Suddenly, she put her head in her hands and began to cry. You don't want me, she sobbed. Oh, you don't want me because I'm not a boy. Now don't cry, said Marilla kindly. Don't you understand? This is the worst thing that's happened to me in all my life. Well, you can stay here just for tonight, said Marilla. Now, what's your name? The child stopped crying. Will you please call me Cordelia? She asked. Call you Cordelia? Is that your name? Well, no, it isn't, but it's a very beautiful name, isn't it? I like to imagine my name is Cordelia because my real name is Anne Shirley, and that's not a very interesting name, is it? Marilla shook her head. The child has too much imagination, she thought. Later, when Anne was in bed, Marilla said to her brother, she must go back to the children's home tomorrow. Marilla, don't you think? Began Matthew. She's a nice little girl, you know. Matthew Cuthbert, are you telling me that you want to keep her? Asked Marilla crossly. Matthew looked uncomfortable. Well, she's clever and interesting but we don't need a girl. But perhaps she needs us. Matthew replied, surprisingly quickly for him. Marilla, she's had a very unhappy life up to now. She can help you in the house. I can get a boy from the village to help me on the farm. What do you think? Marilla thought for a long time. All right, she said in the end. I agree. The poor child can stay. I will look after her. Matthew smiled happily. Be as good and kind to her as you can, Marilla. I think she needs a lot of love. Chapter 2, at Green Gables. And so the next morning, Marilla said, Well, Anne, Matthew and I have decided to keep you. Only if you are a good girl, of course. Why, child, what's the matter? I'm crying, sobbed Anne. Because I'm very happy. It's beautiful here. People say I'm very bad. I will try very hard to be good. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now stop crying, child, said Marilla a little crossly. And listen, we're going to adopt you and send you to school after summer holidays. And stop crying. Can I call you Aunt Marilla? I will never have my family there, so I'd like to have an aunt. We could imagine that you're my mother's sister. I couldn't, answered Marilla firmly. Don't you imagine things? Asked Anne, surprised. No, I don't, Marilla replied. I do my housework and look after Matthew and go to church on Sunday. There's no time for imagined things in this house. Just remember that, Anne. Anne was silent for a few minutes. Then she said, Marilla, do you think I will find the best friend in Avonlea? Someone who really understands me and knows all my secrets. I've always wanted a friend like that. Our friends, the Berries, have a daughter called Diana, who's 11 like you. But if you want to play with her, you will have to be very good. Mrs. Berry is very careful about Diana's friends. Diana, what a beautiful name, said Anne excitedly. Her hair isn't red, is it? I hope it isn't. She looked sadly at her red plaits. I hate my hair. Diana has a dark hair. She's a good, clever girl. Try to be like her, Anne. When the two girls met, they knew at once that they would be good friends. They often played together in fields, or by the river, or in the garden, in the morning, and helped Marilla with housework. Then in the afternoon she played with Diana, or talked happily to Matthew while he worked on the farm. She soon knew and loved every flower, tree, and animal at Green Gables. The Cuthberts had another friend, Mrs. Rachel Lynde. She liked to know everything that was happening in and around Avonlea. She was very interested in the Cuthberts' little orphan girl. So one day she visited Marilla. I was very surprised to hear about the child, she told Marilla. So you and Matthew have adopted her. I'm very surprised myself, answered Marilla with a smile. But she's a clever little thing, you know, and she's always dancing or singing or laughing. Mrs. Lynde shook her head sadly. What a mistake, Marilla. You've never had any children yourself, so how can you look after her? Just then, Anne ran in from the garden. She stopped suddenly when she saw a stranger in the kitchen. Mrs. Lynde looked at the thin little girl in the short dress, with a freckled face and red hair. Isn't she thin, Marilla? She said. Just look at those freckles, and hair as red as carrots. Anne's face went red. She ran up to Mrs. Lynde. I hate you, she shouted angrily. I hate you. You're a horrible fat old woman. And she ran upstairs. Oh dear, said Mrs. Lynde. What a terrible child. Marilla, you will not have an easy time with her. You were rude to her, Rachel, Marilla replied before she could stop herself. Well, said Mrs. Lynde. She got up and walked to the door. I think this orphan is more important to you than I am. When I think how long we've been friends, you will have trouble with her, I can tell you. Well, I'm sorry for you, that's all. Goodbye. Marilla went upstairs to Anne's room. The child was lying on her narrow bed, sobbing loudly. You mustn't get angry like that, Anne. Mrs. Lynde is my friend, and you're very rude to her. She was rude to me, said Anne. She said I was thin and freckled and red-haired. It was very unkind. I understand how you feel, said Marilla, but you must go to her and tell her you're sorry. I can never do that, said Anne firmly. Then you must stay in your room and think about it. You can come out when you agree to say that you are sorry. Anne stayed in the room all the next day. Downstairs the house was very quiet without her. That evening, while Marilla was busy in the garden, Matt went up to Anne's room. The child was sitting sadly by the window. Anne, he said shyly, why don't you say you're sorry? Then you can come down, and we can all be happy. I'm sorry now, said Anne. I was very angry yesterday, but do you really want me to? Yes, do, please. It's lonely downstairs without you. But don't tell Marilla I've talked to you. Marilla was pleased to hear that and was sorry. Later that evening, when she and Anne were in Mrs. Lynde's warm kitchen, Anne suddenly fell on her knees. Oh, Mrs. Lynde, cried the little girl, I'm very sorry. I can't tell you how sorry I am, so you must just imagine it. I'm a bad girl, but please say you will forgive me. I will be sad all my life if you don't. She's enjoying herself, thought Marilla, watching Anne's face. She doesn't look sorry at all, but happy and excited. But Mrs. Lynde said kindly, Of course I forgive you. And later she said to Marilla, Perhaps you're right to keep her. She's a strange little thing, but I think I like her. Chapter 3. At Avonlea School. When school started in September, Anne and Diana walked there and back together every day. What a beautiful day, Anne said happily one morning as the two little girls walked close to Bill's. I'm very lucky to have you as my best friends, Diana. You're my best friend, aren't you? Of course, Anne, replied Diana. taking Anne's hand. And just think, the day you will meet Gilbert Blythe. He's 3 years older than us and very good looking. He's just come back from holiday and starts school today. Oh, boys, said Anne. I'm not interested in them. But she did look at Gilbert when they arrived at school. He was a tall boy with curly brown hair and a friendly smile. He's good looking, and whispered to Diana, but why does he smile at me? He doesn't know me. Avonlea school was quiet today. The teacher, Mr. Phillips, was having some of older children at the back of the schoolroom, and was looking out of the window at the red and yellows of the trees and the silvery blue of the river. She was far away in the world of her imagination. But Gilbert wanted her to look at him. He whispered to her, but she didn't move. He was surprised. Girls are usually very ready to look at him. Suddenly, he put his arm out, put a red plate, and said in a loud whisper, "Carrot, carrot," and jumped up and looked angrily at Gilbert. "You horrible boy," she cried. "I hate you." And then she brought her heavy book down on Gilbert's head. Mr. Phillips heard the noise and came slowly to the front of the schoolroom. "Anne Shirley, why did you do that?" he asked. She stayed silent. Gilbert said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Phillips. I was rude to her. That's why she hit me." But the teacher did not listen to Gilbert. "I cannot have bad children in my school," said Mr. Phillips firmly. "Anne, go and stand in front of the class." And there, Anne stood for the rest of the day, a lonely little girl with a small white angry face. "I hate Mr. Phillips," she thought, "and I will never look at or speak to Gilbert Blythe again." The next day, some of the school children were playing in the farmer's field in their lunch hour, so they were a little late for afternoon school. Anne ran into the classroom at the same time as the boys, just after the teacher. "You are late, Anne," said Mr. Phillips. "You won't sit with Diana today. I see that you enjoy being with the boys very much, so go and sit next to Gilbert this afternoon." Anne's face went white. "He can't mean it," she thought. "Did you hear me, Anne?" asked Mr. Phillips. "Yes, sir," said Anne and moved slowly to Gilbert's desk. There she sat down and put her head on the desk with her arms over it. "This is the end," she was thinking. "I wasn't the only person who was late, and it sent me to sit with the boy, and the boy is a Gilbert Blythe." The rest of the day went very slowly for Anne. When it was time to leave, she went to the desk next to Diana's and took all her books, pens, and pencils with her. "What are you doing, Anne?" asked Diana. "I'm not coming back to school," replied Anne firmly. "Oh, but Anne, we're reading a new book next week, and we are playing a new game on Monday, and it will be very exciting, and you will miss it." But Anne was not interested. "I'm very sorry, Diana," was her only answer. That evening, Marilla ran round to Rachel Lynde's house. "Rachel, please help me. Anne says she won't go back to school. What am I going to say to her?" Mrs. Lynde knew about Anne's trouble at school, and she always very pleased when people asked her to help. She smiled and sat back comfortably. "I've had 10 children myself, so I know all about them," she said. "And can stay at home for a while, but she will want to go back to school again soon, I'm sure." So Anne stayed at home and only saw Diana in the evenings. She was a child who felt very strongly. She hated Gilbert Blythe, but she really loved Diana. One evening, Marilla found Anne crying in the kitchen. "What's the matter, child?" she asked in surprise. "I love Diana very much," sobbed Anne. "I can live without her, Marilla, But what will happen when she marries? I hate her husband already. I can imagine her in church in a long white dress, and then she will go away, and I will never see her again. Marilla turned away to hide her smiling face. What a strange, funny child it was. Marilla tried not to laugh, but she couldn't stop herself. You and your imagination, Anne Shirley, she cried, and she laughed and laughed. Mrs. Lynde was right, of course. After a few days, Anne decided to go back to school. All the children were pleased to see her again, but she did not speak to Gilbert Blythe.